My name is Joseph Becherer. I'm the Chief Curator and Vice President, and we're here at Frederick Meijer Gardens and Sculpture Park. And we're standing in the very midst of an incredible exhibition by the Chinese artist and activist Weiwei. And this is probably the space in which we've raised the most eyebrows, because the wallpaper is called Finger. And we're not intended to be out there offending anybody, nor is the artist. If you go along and you read the information about this particular piece, you realize that it's part of a long series of works that he began in 1995, basically through photography. But what we're seeing around us are a whole series of Weiwei's extended arm and extended middle finger, which pretty much is known around the world as a gesture, or the gesture. For him, the finger started out as a project where he was calling into question what is his, and therefore what is our relationship with places, with institutions. He started out at Tiananmen Square, he did it in front of the Eiffel Tower, he did it in front of the White House, and so on and so forth. And his intent was never to offend, never to come across as abrasive or derogatory, but to pose a question. What is your relationship to organizations? What is your relationship to cultural sites? What is your relationship to communities, to peoples across the globe? And by putting forth such a well-known, very well-known, but powerful gesture, he's asking that question also perhaps with an exclamation point right after the question mark. If you look back across the history of art, you know, not just contemporary art, not just art of the 20th century, but really look back across the history of art, you realize that one of the roles, one of the primary roles that an artist has had has been to provoke, to get us to think about our environment, to get us to think about why we do things, to think about the relationship between one another, among men and women, among institutions, and so on and so forth. And for someone like Weiwei, who is so well known as an activist as well as an artist, that role of provoking, that role of asking is even more important. You know, you can go back to Picasso, and he was doing that. You can go back to many of the Impressionists, and they were provoking. You can go back to Rodin. You can go back to Michelangelo at times, and he was provoking with some of the images that he was creating. Now, you know, many of those artists didn't have the gesture or the finger, as it were, but they had other means of conveying something with as much power, but also with as much integrity. I don't think that there was any level of thinking that in this space, in this room, that this wallpaper was going to be seen any different than the other two sets of wallpapers, because they all ask questions and they all give the artist an opportunity to reflect on things that are part of his bigger career. So here, for example, you have a series that goes all the way back to 1995, so a long period of time for a relatively young artist. The flowers, which are just a couple of yards from where I'm standing, they talk about something very different in terms of the wrong that was done to him and a way of protesting. And then just a couple of yards in the other direction, we have this very sort of gilded and gaudy wallpaper full of glitz and gold, but then you realize that that glitz and gold is really pretty thin because it's talking about his arrest and imprisonment and so on and so forth. So one wallpaper is not necessarily more important or more significant or more controversial than the other, but they're all important because it's a way of taking something that many of us might otherwise walk by, wallpaper, and making us ask questions of ourselves, of our time, our place. If there were one element of this particular wallpaper series that I find quite impressive, is that it's subtle. It's a very simple black and white drawing that the individual drawings blend into a pattern. Now, had he done this with color photographs, as he did with the flowers, or had he even done color like he did with the alpaca wallpaper, you know, the volume would have been increased and the intensity would have been heightened. But here it's subtle, which gets back to the point that, you know, this is not intended to offend. It's intended to make you think. It's intended to make you ask questions. It's intended to provoke. And when you think about it, if people are responding to it because they find delight in it, they find humor in it, they find some level of irritability in it, there's some level of discomfort in it, That's what a work of art is supposed to do. It's supposed to make you think, it's supposed to make you feel, it's supposed to generate new boundaries, new openings to those boundaries in your everyday life. And at that level, I'd say Weiwei is succeeding. As a cultural organization, especially one with now an international reputation, Meijer Gardens has a responsibility to present the most important artists of our time, but also of other time periods, and to present them as fully as possible. Now, yes, sometimes we do shows that are very focused on a certain theme or a certain idea, but if you're doing something that really amounts to a kind of retrospective, you have to present all aspects of an artist's work. So, for example, when we've had Rodin exhibitions, we're showing the whole course of Rodin's career. Next year, we're showing a Beverly Pepper retrospective. We're showing the whole of her work from start to finish. And so I think that's one of the main and most important responsibilities of cultural organizations is to tell the whole story. And then you give the visitor, you give the viewer the opportunity to understand their work, and you give them the opportunity to say, well, this I find more compelling than that. This I find more reassuring than that. This makes me think, this makes me laugh, and so on and so forth. So you have to be honest. You have to be truthful. You have to let people see it and make decisions on their own. Of all 3 sets of wallpapers, believe it or not, this is the wallpaper set that everybody says they want. So, you know, it isn't available commercially, and I don't know where you'd put it, if you put it in your living room or your dining room or wherever, but, you know, people do respond to it.